I'd like to welcome everyone to Indiana Landmark Center. Deedee said that we didn't need to put many chairs out because it just expected her family to show up. But what she didn't tell me is that she evidently sent the invitation list out to her Ancestry.com DNA contacts. So anyway, great opportunity to get to meet somebody new, so fill in the empty seats and enjoy the talk. I'm Suzanne Stannis. I'm the Director of Heritage Education here at Indiana Landmarks, and we are thrilled to see such a great turnout, but I am particularly excited because for someone who does research on historic buildings, there is no greater joy than to share your stories with a kindred spirit that geeks out as much about looking at city directories and fire insurance maps as you do. So I have clung to Deedee since the day I met her. And I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, and I know that many of you have listened to my stories over the years, some with a little more enthusiasm than others. But for all the newbies, and just know now that we have your email address and your phone number so that Deedee and I can reach you and share our latest architectural finds with you. And if you enjoy reconnecting with the past, like so many of us do, we hope that if you're not already members of Indiana Landmarks, you'll join us and help us save meaningful places. You can get information on that out in the lobby. It's been my pleasure to collaborate with Deedee Davis for several years. Were it not for Deedee, our collection of Wilbur Peet images and the research that he compiled for Indian houses of the 19th century would still be inaccessible except to people who came into our library. It's now one of many collections that she's worked on, including images from the Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission that she's digitized through her work at the Heron School of Art. At Heron, Deedee is the visual resources specialist for their library. She grew up on the east side and graduated from Heron with a BFA in photography when the school was still on the 16th Street campus. And she's resided in that same neighborhood for the past 20 years. Deedee is far too modest to tell you that she's responsible for collecting, promoting, and digitizing significant Indianapolis architectural photographs, slides, and documents that are going to help researchers and homeowners for decades to come. So please help me welcome Deedee Davis.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks for Indiana Landmarks for having me. Really excited to talk, slightly nervous, so I didn't expect such a big crowd, so let's get started. Okay, so this is my house. This is the one that started it all. So when I first started at the Heron School of Art, somewhere in the late 90s, I had the opportunity to rent in this house. And I have to say that I have always been an appreciator of older homes. When I grew up on the east side, and we would have field trips downtown, one of my favorite things was our bus passing by Woodruff Place. I think I enjoyed it more than actually whatever the field trip was going to, just staring out the window as the bus was going by. So it was a great honor to be in a house that I really, really appreciated. And when I moved in there, the landlord had owned the building since 1946. This is my landlord about close to that time. This is John Booker, and he still influences my personality and my life today. He is a great guy. He bought this house in somewhere around 1946 for $10,000. And he lived there up until 2007. So, and he taught me how to do some electrical work, not very well, and some plumbing. So, and I'd ask him, I had questions about this house since he'd owned it for so long, and I said, Booker, tell me, what do you know about this house? Do you have any pictures of it? And he said, I've got a ton of pictures of it. And if you live near an art school, you will have tons of portraits of your house of various quality. And so I said, no, do you have any photos? Do you know anything about the history of the house? He says, no, probably the oldest photo I have is one that he's in. And this is probably right about the time that he bought it. And he'd told me that he is one of these gentlemen sitting on the corner, and that the other gentleman was a man that lived in the house next door, and that he met a terrible end by being kicked in the head by a goat. So that's the only story that I know about this picture as far as, but it's a nice hand-colored, but this is the earliest view I had. But the fact that I was at the Heron School of Art and I worked in the library as I went to school, and I also took a couple of classes. There were two instructors that did classes there on Saturdays. One was a history of architecture of Indianapolis, taught by Bill Selm, and then there was a class that I think was a history of researching your home by Paul Diebold. I mean, I think that's, if Paul can correct me if that's wrong, but both of those classes, and then also working in the library, really helped me rein in this search. Any question I had, I know I could go to them and ask. And so what I'd learned, first thing, living in a historic district, is there's a preservation plan. And I found in this preservation plan for Heron Morton, the year my house was built and a little bit of background. And this is actually a little larger than the background on a lot of other houses. I think Bill Selm might have wrote this, but this says Louis H. Gibson. So now I know the name of the man who built and designed and lived in the home that I lived in. And it was kind of interesting to find out that he was an architect and that he did some other things. And then I'd also found out that there was an entry that Paul Diebold had written on him in the Encyclopedia of Indianapolis. If you're familiar with this book, it's really nice. You learn a lot from it. And this is where I learned that he was an author. He had published 2 books on residential architecture. And this was really fascinating. But the citation at the bottom of the article I was really interested in too. So I found what would end up being sort of an obituary for him. He'd met sort of a dramatic end in 1907. He had overdosed on morphine in a hotel downtown. This would actually have been near the Ram Brewery. Is the Ram Brewery still in business on Illinois? If it is, this is the location for it. It's sort of sad because this hotel had just opened up, and only a month into its being opened up, he unfortunately had expired in one of the rooms there. But and sort of this dramatic first part of the article. The second part really talked about all the things he was for. He was part of the art association. Some of the other things, all these articles that he's writing on civic improvement and needlework. I mean, he's constantly writing. So I'd say late 90s that I was able to find a copy of his first book that was dealing with architecture, this Convenient Houses. And this book, as it says, there are 50 plans. So you can see they're laid out here. These are all the first story plans. And there are elevation drawings that are throughout the book, and then some photos, but none of these are identified. And it took me a while to kind of look through things, but I think I found a plan that matched my house. Wasn't quite sure, because this is a house that had been broken up into apartments, and things had been changed a bit, but it looked fairly similar. And you can kind of see here, there's some similarities there, but there isn't a full front porch. But this is where either Paul Diebold or Bill Selm had come to me and said, check the Sanborns. Now, if you're not familiar with Sanborn maps, they are the greatest thing ever, ever. And I will gladly tell you about them. I will evangelize Sanborns. If you are a big dork like me, you will enjoy them. So let me explain a little bit for some people. Back in this era, if you're getting fire insurance and you go to an insurance salesman and you say, I live at this address, well, they're going to look at this map, see if your house is a wood frame or brick or stone, and your proximity to a fire hydrant, which you might not see in these maps, but it's a little black dot, usually on the corners of the street. So this would tell you, what your rate of insurance would be. But for people like me, these are a gold mine now. These are great. They tell you what changes with a home. The Sanborns are just unmatched with the detail. They're just wonderful. And I was very happy to be introduced to them. So and I have to share that we have digitized them at IUPUI. So if you want to see these online, I have a handout in the back that will give you the address for this. So I recommend enjoying these. These are really great maps. And you can probably, some of you, find your own homes on these maps as well. So when I found my house on the Sanborn, I could see that it really was very close to the plan in the Convenient Houses book. And that was fairly convincing. I was pretty sure that I think I had it. And then recently, not too long ago, maybe a couple years back, they had put a plaque up for T.C. Steele over at Heron, and I was invited to that event. And even though I work in an art library, you think I'd know a little bit more about T.C. Steele, but I kind of got interested in his work a little more. I kind of looked at some things, and I'd found a photo, or not a photo, I'd found an image of one of the paintings, and I thought, that yellow one looks like my house. I can't prove it. There's no way you can prove it, but I'll give an example. Now, if you didn't know, T.C. Steele lived in the home where the original Heron School of Art was. This was T.C. Steele's home up until the point where they built Heron. And if you're looking at an old Sanborn here, this is what I was sending to people, trying to convince them that this was my house. If you look from T.C. Steele's studio, you can see the proximity of the two houses there, and if you look at the sunlight, I really sold this. But what really convinced me, what really sold it, I think, is when I started scraping paint, and the bottom layer of my house is that golden yellow that shows there. So I may not have proof, but I'm pretty sure I can go out and tell people I have a T.C. Steele painting of my house and get away with it. But I've been in contact with Gibson's family over the years, and they've sent me some photos, and I do have one photo. Not very, it's fairly close up, but this is Gibson's eldest daughter, Jessie, and this is on the front porch. And whoever took this photo, I really appreciate, because you can see the original address on the porch. There's no question of where the house is. So the oldest photo I have of this house is a charming one, but it's very close. And just an added side note, Louis Gibson's daughter Jessie attended MIT and also became an architect. And her graduating thesis from MIT was a design for the Heron School of Art before it was built. So sort of a fascinating little side note there. So that's kind of the extent of where the research on my house up to this point. So, and as I told you, I was really fascinated with just older homes in general. And this is something else that's relating to my work with IUPUI and Heron. These books like these are digitized at IUPUI in the university library. And here's the collection here. It's just called Indianapolis History. And these particular books had images of houses all around Indianapolis, but they're only listed by the owner's name. And I was really curious to find out where these houses were. So, and as I said, because I'm a big dork, and this is something I do for fun, I would go to the city directories, I would find the address for these owners in the city directories, and then I'd go back to my favorite things, the Sanborns, and I would pinpoint these. And actually, I brought a prop, so I'm sorry, I'm going to show it off. So I printed off all the Sanborns and made a giant scroll of them so I could pinpoint all the houses that I found. I do this for fun. I really do. But this was before I found a website. There's a website called What Was There, and I don't know if anyone's seen this before, but this is great. So what I could do is I can add these images from these books to this website, and that way when I want to find something in a particular location, I've already got it entered on this. This is sort of a crowdsourcing page where, and this is international, you can add images to a map anywhere with this website, and I really love it. It's been very helpful to me when I need to go back and find out where some of these houses are. So anyway, because I enjoy doing this so much, I would recognize some houses, and I'd see something in one of the books that looked really familiar to me. And then I could compare it. I could go back to Gibson's book and I'd say, oh, okay, well this has to be the same house. But now I know that this house is in Woodruff. And you can see here these details match exactly. This one book, I mean, they're a year apart. One's from 1888 and Gibson's book is from 1889. So I now know that this home belonged to Alexander Ayres, which I decided to find a very comical pose of him here. So Alexander Ayres was a judge downtown. I haven't figured out if he's related to the Ayres family, but I don't think so, the Ellis Ayres family. So here's another view of his house in later years. This house made it up to the early 90s in Woodruff Place, and if you're going through Woodruff, this is the location of it now. I'm sorry. So this was on the West Drive. But anyway, the end result for me is that it's really exciting to find these. It was really neat to be able to find these things. And because I was getting so interested in the Sanborn maps, there was another photo in his book. This one, and this is very much his style. He was very much into shingle and bringing shingle to Indianapolis. And as he says in this book, it's a shingle house of a severe type. And I thought, okay, this is a really interesting floor plan. And I thought I could scan through these Sanborns and maybe I could find this floor plan or this layout in a Sanborn, and I did. And that was really exciting because it was like, okay, I can really find these things. So this one, unfortunately, again, this was at 14th and Pennsylvania Street. So if you recognize the apartments there on the east side, this made it up until, this was built about 1890 and made it to only 1918. So the family that owned this lot gave it up so it could become apartments really early on. But what a gorgeous, gorgeous house. I mean, to have a shingle style like that in town is just really something. Some of the other things in the book, they weren't necessarily photos, these illustrations, and for some reason, for the longest time, I believed anything that was a photo was built, and anything that wasn't, was just a suggestion. This would be a lovely home. But that's not the case, and thumbing through these photo books through the Indianapolis History Collection at IUPUI, I found yet another that this one actually existed. And this one was a little tougher to find because it didn't give the owner's name. It just says a residence on Delaware Street. So you really had to go through the Sanborns and find this one. And yet again, I was in a really good position. I found a really nice match. This was as you can see here, it's a brick house with a stone porch. This was very sturdy. And here's a recognizable intersection for this one. This is where the Jordan Apartments on 14th and Delaware. So this one actually made it a little later, built about 1888 and torn down in 1940. So sort of a shame on that, but they're not all torn down. I did the bad news first. So here's a nice example. Some of these elevation drawings, if anyone lives in Heron Morton or the Old North Side and you see me and I'm staring at your house, I'm not casing the place. I see something. So don't call the cops. I'm only looking. And in doing this, I see some details. So this particular house here, this one still exists. It's not in the shape that it was originally. It's a double now, I think. And this is at 16th and Central. But a lot of the same details remain. And this floor plan is intact in the book. So if someone wanted to go through and put it back together, then it's all there. And even some more modest, some smaller plans. This house here, this is on 13th Street, almost in the same shape, maybe with the addition of just a arts and crafts style sort of porch addition. And this one was a fun one to find. This was just kind of going through Woodruff Place, and I wasn't really sure, but that porch detail, I stared at that for a while. I think I've seen that somewhere before, but all of the elements are missing from this, so I wasn't really sure if it was gonna be right. And I think it was Joan Hostetler, if Joan's here, runs the Indiana album. She was familiar with some of the collections at the Historical Society and said, you should check out some of these collections there. And it was some people that lived across the street. They had like 40 photo albums that they donated to the Historical Society, and they had a great photo of this house. So I know that all of those details had matched, and what a great home that was. Shingle style with these really intricate scroll work on the porches, just fascinating. There's a closer detail of it. So that's still intact, just not quite as nice, but it's still there. I don't want the owner to be here and look at me like. So, and of course, if you saw the advertisement, this is one of my favorites here. I think I came up to the person who owned this house during a Woodruff sale and annoyed them by saying, I know who built your house. but I hope that they, it's a really great example. And one of these things that I don't know if the Palladian window was original to the design, but here again, the family across the street with their photos, I could see that it was all very much intact. So, and what's also interesting about this house is that it has sort of a cousin in Lockerbie. This design, though it's slightly different, you can see some of the major details are still there. So I can't prove that this is a Gibson, but I'm just going to go with it anyway. So, and just another little image here. These two Gibson houses are not next to each other in real life. This double exposure from across the street, I just think is really interesting. So it was a sort of little gift to me from several hundred years ago, or just 100 years ago. So anyway, and then there's a few that are still around that I could identify by little signature details. The scroll work done on the porch here on this one kind of stood out to me, and then I also noticed this two-bayed window, this Oriole window on the side of the house. That's something you see a lot in Gibson's work, and I stood out in front of this house for a while, and actually the owner did come out, and I had my book at the time, so I could show him what I was doing. So, so this has actually been refurbished really recently. So, and then there's one last one in convenient houses. I got really confident. This is a beautiful one that he actually didn't have the plan. He only had, this is like the photo next to the title page. I'm sure there's a proper name for that, but there's no floor plan for this one. And I thought, well, I'm doing really good with the Sanborn stuff. I'm going to find this one, and I found something that looked really similar at 15th and Central, and I thought, okay. Found a city directory, found the name, and then I abused my Ancestry.com subscription by contacting people who are not related to me and saying, I'm not related to you, but, and usually people wouldn't write me back for that, but I said, I think this house, your family's house, I think I know the architect. Do you have a picture of it? And the lady wrote me back, and she said, here you go. And I thought, oh, well, that's not it, but we can see that it's fairly similar in its layout, and so. But just as a side note, this house that is at 15th and Central is no more. It is gone. But who built there followed the original floor plan from the Sanborn. So it's sort of like they've, you wouldn't know that necessarily, but yeah, that's kind of neat. But how I discovered this house was. As Suzanne had mentioned, I work with digital collections, and I started digitizing Wilbur Pete's images that he did for Indiana houses of the 19th century. And in going through those images, I noticed. Here's an image of the collection, by the way, if you want to check it out. It's part of the handout I have in the back. I found an image of this house, almost looking exactly the same, just a few details missing. And I had an address with it. This was the home of Charles Craiglow, who was a funeral director and an orange grove owner in California, which is why he's sitting in a tree with an orange and a glass of water. This was, I like him sitting in a tree better than this formal portrait. But sadly, again, here's one that didn't last long. This is at 19th and Illinois. So this became a parking lot. This was something, actually, his photo that he took here was probably not long after this was demolished for the lot. So it's like Pete was just catching things right before they were disappearing. So anyway, and that's the beginning with Convenient Houses. That's his first architecture book. In the time that I was researching this stuff, I really wanted to find about the man. I wanted to find any images of him I could. And I was able to find an image at the Historical Society, but it wasn't really helpful. That's his back there to you. He was a member of the Portfolio Club, and I guess he was kind of shy, at least in this photo. I enjoyed this image because the only person looking at the camera is the portrait on the wall over there, and that's kind of an interesting thing. And I'd been in contact with family, and I'd found images of his family, but they didn't have any images of him himself, so I still had to wonder. But going back to his roots, he grew up in, he was born in Aurora, but he grew up in Indianapolis. His father had come here to run a mill, and it was H Gibson and Company, and eventually his father had bought out the Soul Brother part of it. This is an image of the mill. You might be more familiar with the name Acme Evans than you would the Gibsons. The Gibsons only owned it for a brief period of time, and if you've walked the canal, you've walked past the original Gibson mill that is the Acme Evans mill. And I was happy to find an image of it when it was actually still the Gibson mill. So Louis Gibson grew up in a milling family and was very familiar with the practice, but went on to go to Northwestern Christian University, which became Butler for a couple of years, and then went on to MIT for architecture, and he was a fellow classmate of Louis Sullivan for at least a year. His brother writes that they were good friends. There is some correspondence, not much, but you could tell that there's somewhat of a relationship there over the years. And he comes back. He starts working for. He's a partner to Edwin Catcham, and they do some work together for a few years. And all of a sudden, around 1880, if you see this city directory entry, he's given up the architecture business and gone back to be superintendent of the mill. And I always picture that his father came up to him and said, you know, you need to get out of this crazy business, son. You've got a mill, that's your future. You've got a family, you've got a wife, you know, quit fooling around and get down to business. And I thought, oh, you know, I just pictured him like hating milling and hating all this stuff. But that's not necessarily true. The more I'd find out about him, he was writing constantly about milling, and this Northwestern miller, he wrote several articles. He had a column in it called Rough Notes for this trade publication, and I'd found out that his first books were not architecture books; they were milling books. So, and how strange that, you know, this, you know, very well advertised as the most successful book of the kind ever published. That's very confident, especially since. Didn't hear much about it, but still. So this was sort of an interesting book. It's very factual. If you wanted to run a very large mill, he wrote that out for you. He had great designs for it. If you wanted to have a small mill, he helped you out there too. And then this is after the mill business had waned. He had his father died in 1883, and he'd sold the mill. So he'd gone back into the architecture practice and was still writing about milling. So he did not hate milling. But still, these are before his architecture books. So in 1886, he does this really bizarre and very hard to read book that is a novel that is about. It's sort of a two-part story. There's a cranky old miller stuck in his ways where a young miller comes in to change to the new processes of milling. He's trying really hard to convince him, and yet this young miller also falls in love with one of the mill employees' daughters, and it's really weird. But But it's true to life. You can see, I found an article a little later where some old miller was talking about his time at the Gibson mill, and they said they were okay until they put an architect over the mill, and then went with this new process, and then everything went down from there. So I think it's kind of funny that, you know, I know who the architect is, but but anyway, so he continues to be an architect in this time, and then he's also starting to do these designs for the Northwestern miller, how to design a mill. So he's doing these floor plans and these elevations to show to people, and he's also starting to do these syndicated floor plans that you'd see in newspapers. And it wasn't until a database called Chronicling America came out that the Library of Congress put out. And if you haven't seen that, it's a really great database that I see all of this work that he's doing that's completely out of state. None of these are in Indiana at all. I mean, this is in Kansas and in Montana. And here's one, if you are familiar with the Old North Side, this house is just up the street, but this is being advertised in North Dakota. So sort of an interesting thing, but this is what starts him compiling these plans for his first architecture book, not his first book, but his first architecture book in 1889, Convenient Houses, which we reviewed. So, excuse me. And so after he'd written Convenient Houses, he was getting some good business, but he's still doing all of this other writing that is not quite related to architecture. Still writing for the Northwestern Miller, and now he's writing for a publication called Paving and Municipal Engineering that was actually published here. And he either was asked or more likely convinced these editors to pay him to spend a year abroad studying milling processing and roads in Europe. So he did. He spent 1891 in Europe writing about street cleaning in Paris and pavements in Amsterdam and very highly detailed articles. He's really into this. And at the same time, Northwestern Miller's getting all these interesting articles on wet French wheat and the British markets. But in the time that he spends in Europe in 1891, he is compiling all his research in traditional architecture methods and all of these interesting things in Europe into his second architecture book, Beautiful Houses. And this is a really great book. It's not as busy as his first one. There's only a few floor plans in this compared to Convenient Houses. And he's showing a lot of what's inspiring him, these chateaus in France and this southern Fachwerk timber architecture in Germany, but also these more modern things. You know, you're right in the middle of shingle style being really popular and sort of this arts and crafts. These are not his designs, but what's inspiring him in this book. And then he's also asked Louis Sullivan if he can use some of his motifs, his decorative ornamental designs in his book. So Sullivan's really influenced him, I think, a little later on, and you can see some of that in this book as well. And with this book, he's actually only a few times identified some of his designs. Here he lists, this is A.G. Kreitlein, if I'm saying the name right. This is Meridian and Pratt Streets, and if you're not sure, Pratt is the former name for 9th Street. So, and this design is very Queen Anne with this just overly German overtones of this. And with this, he only showed the elevations. There's not even a floor plan for this in the book, but thank you, Google Books. I found that this actually was built and existed at 9th and Meridian Street. And what was great about finding this particular article, it shows, it was a different owner it showed, but someone who owned a hardwood company. And so it shows all the designs of the hardwood floors in the house. Now, if that actually existed, wow, that would be really something else. So 9th and Meridian, you may recognize as the location of the independent Turnverein. This was built in 1914, and it always made me mad because I thought, man, this house, it was built in like 1894, and they tore it down. They tore it down to build this, and it really made me mad. But if you look off to the corner, I didn't pay attention for the longest time, but there it is. They moved it. These Germans could not bear to tear down this house. They moved it off to the side. So if you look at these Sanborns here, you could see it made it. It became, I guess, the clubhouse to the clubhouse? I don't know. So this made it up till about 1956, and probably after 60 it's gone, but here's it's part of the apartments that are there now. So at least you get an idea what was on that corner when you drive past it. So another great example, this very beautiful home here. This is one that I went through and tried to find via the Sanborn maps again. And what he does in this book that he didn't do in the other ones, he gives these very beautiful interior shots of these homes. I mean, they're just really gorgeous. And here again, I got lucky and I found that the Sanborn paid off, and I did find it. So this one was my guess at St. Clair and Meridian. And in looking at some images, this Historical Society one, I could see it's there, and then this advertisement in the news, this great illustration. This made it up to maybe the 60s. It was listed a long time as the Library Apartments. And of course now this is it's a parking lot. But it's a gorgeous home there. And this book also listed investment properties. I looked at this and I thought there's no way that these would be in town. This seemed like something that would be more in Chicago or something. It didn't seem like it would be here. And Sanborns were really helping me on this one. I thought, okay, well, he must have built these out of town. Just really amazing doubles here. And here again, these just really great interiors. And what had helped me with this was in the time that I was working, I worked briefly at the Historical Society, and in looking at some of the images there was a image that did not have an address at all. It just said Craiglow, which we knew the funeral director, but there shows a business off to the side over here. But as I said, I'm kind of a big dork, and I knew that this building on the far corner was the Chalfont Flats, which was at I think it was at Michigan and Pennsylvania. So I knew that these were on Pennsylvania, pretty much across from what the federal building is today. And here's a building. Here's a view of it from the State Library, probably mid-20s. And really everything here was torn out for the Legion Mall. This is everything that went away so you could have the Legion Mall. So if you pass by the Obelisk Square, this is your view now from where this was. So yeah, torn out about 20s, I'd say. And here's one of my favorites. I just think this house is really gorgeous. These interiors here really sell me on it. Just these beautiful built-ins. That's his later work just has all of this all over it. And here again, the Sanborns were very helpful. This is one that was at about 16th and Meridian. This is very close to me. And if you know what's at 16th and Meridian, it's a location of a parking lot for CVS, unfortunately. This one was torn down, probably in the late 20s. There was a lot of businesses going in here, so this is one of the earlier ones to go. And my absolute favorite, this is his most playful house and very shingle style. And the absolute only one that he gives himself credit for in his book. Is the only one that he says his name is as the architect for this home. Wasn't really sure about this one until I found a newspaper article that gave an illustration for it. And so I knew the address of it, but I was really happy working with the Peat Collection that I found a front-on view of this house. And this was at 21st in Pennsylvania. Really gorgeous house, really interesting signature design. And if you look at it right, it looks like someone yawning to me. Do you see it? I keep looking at it. It's so charming in that way. And then I've had other people, if you're younger or enjoyed the Never-Ending Story, it also looks like the Luck Dragon, if you've seen this before. So this house is just terribly charming. But here again, Pete was right there right before demolition. So this house came down and is the site of some condos now over there on 21st in Pennsylvania. So at least you could think of a yawning person every time you pass 21st in Pennsylvania. So there's a few examples in beautiful houses that were well known before I started looking for things. And these are homes up in Muncie that Gibson did for the Ball brothers. This is Minnetrista, which if you've been to the Minnetrista Cultural Center, you'd know that name. This house did not last long in this form. It was actually redone by an architect in 1902 to be a little bit larger, but it had burned by 1967. But what he also does in this book is he gives a lot of these nice drawings of the interiors as well as the photos. So this is not around, but Oakhurst, George Ball's residence is still there if you've been up there, and it's probably the best example of his work that I'm aware of that's around. It's just in great shape. And another one in Muncie that's not in the book, but I had to include it. This Kimbrough house that's there, and I just found out actually recently finding a photo of that tiled roof. This almost had like a more arts and crafts feel to me, until I found this one with this amazing detailed roof. It's just over the top. So that's new to me this week. So I learn something every time I mess with this collection, I tell you. But one of the best examples. Paul Diebold, because he's so familiar with Gibson's work, and I will share things with him, and he would send me images of things since he's kind of around the state, and he'd give me an address. He says, "What do you think?" He said, he termed the word Gibsonian. "Is this Gibsonian?" And so he gave me an address in Meridian, and if you ever do anything with a Google Street View, and if you've overshot where you've wanted to go, and then you come back and then you overshoot it again, and then so the house he's showing me, I kind of went past it, but I noticed another house, and it was this house, and I thought, this looks really familiar, but I can't quite place it. It just, and I thumbed through the books, and what I found was this elevation plan that he gave, and I thought, well, this surely can't be it, because it's not the same sort of detail. So I Googled the address, and this house in Meridian was actually for sale. And I was very happy about that, because what had happened was they had done all these interior shots of this home, and it was exactly it. These are just amazing details just all over this house, and they're all still intact and just in great shape. To just go through this book, I found this like at 2 in the morning, and I couldn't sleep. It was just like, you talk about geeking out on something. It was just like unreal. And just these details are just fascinating. This tile work is just over the top. And I think this house is for sale, so if anyone wants to go to Meridian and buy it, I would be very, very happy with you if you would let me in and take pictures again. So here's some other details here. Just a gorgeous house. So this kind of ends with beautiful houses. There's lots of plans to find still in there, but this is what I found so far. And after his work, this is an 1895 book. There isn't a lot more that I found with floor plans. There's 2 other plans that he did after that point. This is one from 1906, and you can see his style has changed just a little bit. He's writing more about using cement in architectural forms. He's really he's pushing for the use of cement work, when I think a lot of other people aren't really interested in using it. He thinks it can be used artistically, and he writes a lot about that, not so much on the floor plans. So it's kind of hard to follow his style after 1895. So that's something that I'm really hoping I can do. But the second floor plan I had for a while, and I was really surprised, because I wouldn't have known that this would have been his house. This was the last floor plan he did, and how very different from what I would have pictured his 1895 work. He's really got a lot of Asian influence here, those flared eaves and this very Art Deco design. And when I found this, I shared it with Paul Diebold, who had put me in contact with this Miss Hudziak, and she shared the email that she didn't know a lot about this house, but she did know it was part of a movie that was filmed out in Greenfield called Push Too Far. And the interior of this home was shot. So, has anyone seen it? It's a great film. It's about a deranged, murderous professional wrestler who has to be taken out by the local karate instructor. And it's a great film. So, and it's hard to get screenshots from this because the interior is really dark, but this is the local karate instructor's home, and you can see some of Gibson's details still kind of stand out here. This is actually from Beautiful Houses, so he's using some of the same design still. So that's the last I found of his work. So I still have to kind of get an idea of what his later work is after 1895. But finding a Gibson house, what I could tell people if you're looking around and you want to know what a Gibson house looks like. Early on, round windows in the gable. That always is a kind of a dead giveaway for me. Not always. There's some other details there. Usually if there's a centered chimney, that kind of gives me an idea that I'm looking for something. all of these examples, very close by, but yes, they're all torn down. The only example of a round window that was still around at least a couple years ago, if anyone lives in Woodruff Place, they would know that this house is now missing its round window. So I wouldn't be able to identify it now, but it's definitely on my radar as a Gibson. And of course, this is the side view of the other Woodruff Place home that had the porch on the third floor. These vents in the gables there, that's definitely something else I look for. I don't see it in a lot of other people's work, but anytime I see that, I feel like it's a very shingle style thing. There's 2 examples in town, both in Lockerbie, that have this, that I, as my landlord would say, I'd bet dollars to donuts that it's his design. The 3/1, sort of the 3 windows over the large window, or the insinuation of it with these blind sort of windows or these panels, definitely if I see that, that's something. This home in Woodruff actually has 2 of them, one on one side and one on the front side there. And then the scroll work, this frieze work that's just really intricate, that's definitely something I look for. And this is a confirmed Gibson that's on Alabama Street that has a lot of that. That house is for sale now too, so if anyone wants a nice Gibson. Another thing that I noticed, these hooded gables, I've seen him in some things that don't quite look like his work, but with these, it's very, I don't know, I get a good vibe off of it. This is a suspect, this one in Lockerbie. It's got a few other details that I think are Gibsonian. But that hood really is something that's sort of signature. And actually, the funeral director's home, this is the sort of a vent, this gable hooded vent that I found on this house at 14th and Central. I can't say that this is a Gibson, but that vent sure makes it look really similar there. Here again, these 2 bayed windows, these Orioles, I guess you'd say. If I see those, that's definitely something that stands out in his work. And these multi-sashes over one large sash. I always think it's funny because his first book is called Convenient Houses, and it has a bunch of these, but if you wash these windows, there's nothing convenient about washing these windows at all. It's not convenient. This example on 33rd Street, I'm not, it's a suspect design. I kind of feel like this is the direction he went after 1895, so this is something I have to look into, but I definitely think it's a suspect there. And in his later work with Beautiful Houses, this sort of slatted gable on the porch, it's something that's very similar with this house on English. And it's kind of hard to tell on that slide, but there's sort of a blind scroll work that's similar as well. So there's a couple of different things. And then of this house that's in Shelbyville kind of has that too. So there's this Sullivan-esque detail that's on Oakhurst. That's a definite thing that you'd see with his later work. And fairly recently, there was a house in Woodruff that, not the front of it, but the side of it really made me think of Oakhurst. And the fact that it's all concrete, or cement, sorry, that made me think that this is a definite suspect that I need to look into. It's really got a lot of this sort of nice Sullivan-esque ornament on it. But there's plenty to find still. Here's things that I have yet to find. These photos existed somewhere. These houses are there somewhere, and I have yet to find them. So, and just in the opposite way, there are plenty of houses that I believe are his, but I can't quite prove it yet, but I definitely feel that way. So, and back to Gibson himself, you know, I was complaining about where I'd only seen the back of him. In doing some newspaper research, I found something that had said that he'd done an article for the Northwestern Miller that is embellished by an excellent portrait of himself, and I was very excited. And because I work in a library, I can enter a library loan, and I said, "Hey, library, can I have this article?" And they said, "Sure, here you go." And I said, I'm never going to find a picture of this guy, am I? So I wrote them back, and I said, could I have this in high resolution? And they said, sure. So I finally have a picture of him. And not only that, because I have this picture of him, I can go back to the Portfolio Club and I can find him here. Here he is later with Bernard Vonnegut just below him as he's messing with his pinky. I wonder if he's deep in thought. So, but anyway, so that's it. So here we are. There's the end of it. So thank you for listening. Thank you.